It's like a library in here today. It's really quite nice. All right, are we live? We're live. We are going to continue conversations about climate resilience and hear about beaver ecology from Alair Diamond, ecologist at the Vermont Land Trust. Welcome, Alair.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you, and we can
Great.
see your little square up in the corner.
Okay, well, good. So hopefully you can see the landscape is a lot bigger than me on the screen. Well, thanks for inviting me. I have just come with very kind of short notice, so I hope you'll forgive just me having a very short presentation. Luckily, there's a lot of just great images, and I just was thinking with the time that we have that we could spend some time just looking at those. Really, I'm interested in talking more about the impact that beavers have on the landscape, less about kind of them as animals. That's just not my area of expertise. So I can give a little introduction to myself, but I'm also just would love to hear kind of what you are interested in learning about or hearing about or talking about today too. So why don't I start? I'll just introduce myself, and then maybe before I launch into the slides, I can hear a little bit about what you would love to hear about. So my name's Alair Diamond. I'm an ecologist at Vermont Land Trust. I have been working at the Land Trust for about 12 years, and I lead our ecology and restoration programs. And so we do a lot of ecological assessments and also restoration projects within the context of land conservation. So for those of you who don't maybe know as much about Vermont Land Trust, I guess, am I seeing everybody in the room that's there? Maybe raise your hand if you know about Vermont Land Trust or have worked with us or.
Yeah, we're all pretty familiar with
Vermont Land Trust. All familiar. Okay. And I saw that Liz Thompson was with you earlier today. And so she and I used to work together until she retired from VLT last year. But yeah, so I think what I love to just share about Vermont Land Trust is that I think a lot of you may understand our work as conservation easements protecting land. But we also do a lot of caring for land in terms of the ecological restoration work that I primarily focus on is one way that we care for land. We also have an outreach and education and engagement component where we connect people to the land as well, whether it's like on the ground activities, events, talks, or publications, webinars, and that kind of thing. So if you have any questions about Vermont Land Trust, I'd love to, be able to answer those too. But I'm here today, just was invited to talk about beavers and beaver ecology is an area of particular interest of mine that I've been developing over the last couple of years. And I guess, can I just ask you before I share what I've brought, just what your questions are, interest is, or how you would like this information to connect with your work as a committee?
Sure. Well, I'm increasingly aware and knowledgeable and watching the beavers in my own neighborhood and learning more about them and appreciate the work that they're doing to manage the landscape and make it climate resilient. And I just wanted to have someone share that information with the committee and talk about all of the benefits that they're providing to us as they work the landscape.
Awesome. That's great.
Representative Tory.
Yeah, I'll just add to that we're also curious in this committee what kinds of agency collaborations and things could be supportive of, optimizing the role of beavers in our communities.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Representative Smith.
I'd like to add something to that. I live in Derby, and beavers are a nuisance animal. They're very nice. They're fun to watch in the water, but they've cost the town of Derby thousands of dollars in road repairs, and we do at times have to send someone out to eliminate them. I guess they're okay in their place, but I'd like to hear from you and where you might think that place is correct to be.
Yeah. That's a great question and a really, really pertinent topic for us in Vermont. I'll definitely talk about that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think that's doing it.
Okay, great. Well, like I said, I've just had a little bit of time to prepare some things for you. So I'm really just hoping to kind of talk through some of these images. I've got some maps and I have a couple snippets from recent research on beavers, and that really relates to climate resilience in the way that I see that impacting us here in Vermont. This is an image of conserved land in Cambridge, the Brewster Uplands Conservation Trust, that I just received these images last week from some drone imagery that was taken in the fall. And I just wanted to start with it because as soon as I saw this picture, I just couldn't stop looking at it. It's just so beautiful. So just to orient folks, this is a beaver wetland complex in the foreground. There are two dams. You can't really see the dams, but you can see the downstream, like the river is flowing toward us. So there's a dam, sort of a smile shaped thing in the lower central part of the picture. And then there's another one just on the downstream end of this other little pond. And I love this picture because it shows this beaver complex. Over to the right is a farm, an active, agricultural area. And then there's a whole series of forest, and there's Mount Mansfield in the background. So this is just our typical kind of Vermont landscape of wetland and farmland and mountains and woodland. And it all kind of fits together. And I love it because it really just shows how beavers are just such an integral part of our landscapes, and they help to create them. So this is a wetland complex that without the presence of beavers would be a single stream flowing through a sort of a low flat area. And beavers, as I think many of you know, and a couple of you referred to this kind of when you were sharing why you were interested in learning about beavers, that they have been part of our landscape for hundreds of thousands of years, and have really created a lot of they've settled in these low valleys and created these wetland complexes that then have so many connections in terms of diversity, biodiversity, but also hydrological impacts beyond the wetlands themselves. And when Vermont was settled as an area by white settlers, I think this is the next picture I have, really shows a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, when Vermont was settled, it was settled at a time, early 1700s, when white trappers had already been like passing through the state for 100 or so years, trapping beavers, just really intensively removing all beavers that they could for the fur trade. And so when the first settlers came to Vermont, started to settle some of the towns and villages that we live in and just think of as part of our state today, they were doing it in a place that was actually like falsely didn't have any beavers in it because the beavers had been trapped out and had not yet returned. So the landscape that they had been creating over hundreds of thousands of years had really been altered in the 100 years or so since trappers arrived, and then sort of the farmers and there's just the other white settlers came behind them and really started to settle our towns. And I love this picture from Rockingham area, Saxons River. It's on Pleasant Valley Road, if anyone's familiar with that area. This is an area near where I grew up, and so I used to drive by this all the time. Pleasant Valley Road here is going south. Here's the village of Saxons River, and here's the Saxons River in the lower part of the photo. And this is an image from 1962 that just shows this area as farmland with a line down the middle of it. So that's an agricultural ditch. It's actually a stream that has been channelized into a straight line by the different farmers that lived in that valley. And that was in the 1960s. You can see that it's just a pretty open agricultural area. But when I was a kid and now when I go by, I just see beaver dam after beaver dam after beaver dam. And so a couple of years ago, I went and looked at some recent aerial imagery and just saw that all of these areas here are beaver dams. You can still see some of the lines connecting them in between, but those, I don't know exactly what happened with the farmers and how they agreed to sort of stop maintaining those ditches. But what you see here is just a series of, I don't forget the number, I've counted them before, 10 or so beaver dams that are now filling that valley instead of this straight pipe. And so I love this image, and I love comparing these because it really shows like the difference between sort of an earlier way of thinking about how we manage water in our landscapes, which was kind of this left-hand thing of like get all the obstacles out of the way, let the water flow as quickly as it can in the straightest line that it possibly can, as fast as it can, get it off the landscape down to the river so we can farm and do whatever else. And then we all know the impact of that. It's like treating our landscapes like sort of a plumbing system is just results in some really dramatic flooding. And the Saxons River has been the recipient of a lot of flood damage over the last few years, versus a watershed where beavers are allowed to just do their thing. They're allowed to build dams. These dams are probably all built by beavers that are somewhat related to each other. So as beaver families grow, the younger males really will go out and they'll try to establish new dams and new lodges further up the watershed. They will try to stay close to where they grew up or where they were born, but when they need to, they will go further as well. A lot of the times when you see beavers that have been hit by cars, those are the younger males that have been I think they're usually like 2-year-old males that are then needing to go and disperse out and find their own places to be. So in this case, there's a really robust setup of beaver dams. And I just think it's like so obvious in this picture, like all this bluish black is water. That's all water that's not just rushing down into the Saxons River. It's staying on the land longer. It's creating more wetlands behind it. And it's, when there's a flood or a large rain event, water is going to flow through that system with all those natural dams a lot more slowly, and it's not going to have as much impact downstream. And so I just think this is a great illustration of sort of how we used to think about the 1962 is a little bit like what the landscape used to look like. Obviously, 100, 200 years before that, 1862, 1762, there would have been like no trees on this landscape at all. 1962, though, we still have that kind of old vision of like how we manage water. Now there's more beaver dams that are able to just make that valley a little more flood resilient. And I thought next, oh yeah, sorry, at any point, if you have questions.
We have a question from Representative Smith.
Thanks,
Sure.
Chair. Are all of those beaver dams still working, beaver dams?
As far as I know, I mean, that image was taken in 2018. So yeah, so every year, it's a really interesting question. They change every single year. So those,
Yeah, go ahead.
that being said, there are beaver dams that are hundreds of years old. When it's a good place and think about like if you were a beaver where you'd build a dam, it would probably be in a narrow constriction of a valley. So those kind of like prime spots are maintained over time. And there are some beaver dams that have been seen, they've been documented by like early explorers in parts of Canada and the US, and then they're still there today. They were mapped by some of the earliest white surveyors. So they can persist over a long period of time. They can also be built and destroyed very quickly. And I think I have a picture later in here of one that I observed near my house in Jericho that was built on the Browns River that got destroyed like 2 weeks later when there was a big rainstorm. So but those dams and Saxons along that Saxons River tributary have been there for a long time, and the bigger ones at least are much more persistent.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I wanted to just share there's very interesting research happening right now, not so much of it in Vermont, but it's very applicable to Vermont. So I just wanted to share 2 different pieces of research with you, or from 2 researchers. One of them is by a geographer named Alan Puddock, who's in the UK. He's at the University of Exeter. And he did some really interesting research about what I just showed you was sort of, it's very intuitive, right? You see a straight line versus you see a bunch of dams. You can think, oh, the water's going more slowly. Floods are going to be less impactful in the area with the beaver dams. He actually quantified that and showed that yes, beaver dam complexes do mitigate the impacts of floods. And so he studied an area in England. This image up on the left is just the overview of his work. An area that did not have beavers, and then beavers, I believe, were actually introduced, and then they started to build dams. So you can see this image on the left, upper left, is the first one is from 2011. And then this bottom picture is from 2014. And these black lines that kind of weave through, each one of those is a dam. So in the first image, there's no beaver dams. In the last one, there's 10 or 11. And he studied with a variety of gauges and so forth. He studied over all of the rain events that happened over several years. In this slide was after he looked at 70 rain events, but that was from 2017, and now he's still studying the same site, and there's been over 1,000 rain events that just show the impact of how the water moves through those systems. So the same amount of water ultimately will move through. I guess there will be some that may just stay as wetland, but overall, water will move through. If you have a big rainstorm, it's going to go over the dam at some point. But what he showed is that those spikes of the flow were a lot lower in the systems where beaver dams were. So this is really general, and this is obviously not my research, and but I just wanted to show you, I think this is a really telling graphic where, and this is a slide from a presentation that he did, that he's showing that above the beaver dams, the flood spikes would be like these very dramatic, see this blue line here that's going spiking up. This is just one example from one rain event, spiking up and then dropping down really quickly. And so imagine like we have a big rainstorm, there's a giant flood pulse that brings just a massive amount of water very quickly, and it quickly moves out. Whereas in the system with where beavers are present, that pulse is a lot more attenuated or spread out. And so you can imagine that the impact of it's moving more slowly, it's spreading out over time, the flow of the water spreading out over time. You're not going to have those massive spikes. Flood levels are not going to get as high there, and it's not going to be as damaging. And then this is like, I will share these slides with you. I know we don't need to read this. This is an image on the right of that dam on the Browns River that was there for like 2 weeks, and then immediately got washed away. But even though it got washed away, there was still a lot of wood in that system from the dam. That was great. But basically this abstract from his 2021 paper about the same site, he's got a couple of really important pieces in here. They're saying that he analyzed 1,000 storm events across 4 different sites, showing an overall trend of reduced total storm flow, increased peak rainfall to peak flow lag times, and reduced peak flows, all suggesting flow attenuation. So spreading out that flow after the beavers were in those systems. And then there's some statistically significant. And then the final statement is just, this research indicates that beavers could play a role in delivering natural flood management. And I think, those of you who observe beaver systems, I think this again is pretty intuitive, that you have these systems where water is able to slow down, it's able to spread out, it goes further out in the valley than just straight down it like a pipe. That's all going to help when we have large rain events. And I wanted to just do a quick exploration through a tool that we've developed at Vermont Land Trust called our Restoration Viewer. And again, I'll share this link with you if you want to do this yourself, but I want to just explore it with you like live. This is an online ArcMap map viewer. And starting just before I jump into it, this is an aerial image of the Charlotte Park and Wildlife Refuge, which is a conserved piece of land in Charlotte, open to the public, has a great network of trails. There's some really interesting wildlife restoration work there that I've been working on with that local committee, and a really beautiful beaver dam complex. And just to give you some context, this is Greenbush Road, this road here that's going through the middle of the photo. The beyond, you see the lake. So we're really close to the lake. There's the Adirondacks beyond. And this beaver complex is the one that I'm going to show you a couple different years of of what it looks like when beavers were less active and then when they've become more active, just so you can see some of the impacts of what they do. And I'm going to need to, let's see, jump out of this and move to my web viewer. So this viewer is showing that site. So this is oriented north to south. This is Greenbush Road over here on the left. This is the railroad, kind of crossing Greenbush Road right by the property. And we have old black and white imagery from like 2011 underneath. And then I have some really high resolution, more recent imagery from 2021, and I also have some from 22, but we'll just work on 21 right now. So to zoom in on this, this is a beaver wetland, or a wetland that has had beavers in the past, but in this image from 2011, you can see just a blue line and also just the actual black kind of line of the stream winding through. There's a little trail. This is one of the boardwalks from the walking paths across the system, and going through here, and this, it just kind of winds around. It's in the middle of a big wetland complex, but you don't see a lot of evidence of beavers. Imagining when there is a big storm event, there is going to be some flood storage in this system just because it is a wetland, but in general, water will just move through that stream and just move right out, go under the railroad tracks, under the road, and off toward the lake. But by 2021, the reason that I got involved with this project is that the town committee was really seeing a lot of beavers being active here, and they wanted to talk about that. So I went out and visited the site, and then we got this imagery. And I'm just swiping back and forth here. So what you're seeing is just the 2021 imagery kind of coming over top of the 2011 imagery. See, the difference here is that a large beaver dam has been constructed right here on the left side of the picture where my cursor is. And we can zoom in and actually see the sticks of it and stuff, but I'm going to give you the overview first. Ponding a bunch of water behind it. Water is still flowing down below it before it goes under the railroad tracks. And then as we go upstream, there's just a number of smaller beaver dams. And so the system has become less of just like a big kind of grassland and more of a really interesting, diverse wetland system that has areas of open water, areas of grasses, areas of shrubs, and then connecting all of it to the forest alongside of it. The forest obviously being a source of wood for those beaver dams. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and let you see a little bit more of kind of what I'm talking about as the resolution kind of catches up with me. I think that it's just, I am always marveling at these images because you can even see like branches of the trees and like fallen trunks that are in the water. But here's that beaver dam. And then as we kind of wind our way up this main channel, you quickly come to another small beaver dam right here. There's another one right here that's kind of shaped like a U. There's another one right over here. So what's interesting is that as the beavers are starting to dam, and this is a very small stream, you know, you could jump across it in a couple steps. As they're starting to dam the main part of the stream, water is obviously still flowing through. And so it's ponding behind, but then sometimes it's also flowing around, which creates just a really interesting wetland complex that has multiple channels. The water isn't just confined to one channel. That also helps to slow the water down, also helps to create habitat for more, you know, macroinvertebrates, amphibians, birds. There's a ton of really interesting migratory birds that use this site. And this is another project I'm working on with these guys. Beavers are really creating this system. This would not be this way without them. So again, I'll just let me just go back to 2011. And again, still a wetland, but just a lot less, to me, a lot less interesting, a lot less diverse before the beavers return to it. And the cool thing about this site is that it's not a place that has any kind of conflict with people because it's a wildlife refuge. The valley is totally contained within the site. So it's not that, you know, the beaver damming is not getting into anyone's yard or a driveway or anything like that. And it just continues on up. If I kind of go a little bit further upstream in the valley, I can see there's the trail that crosses again. You can see a series of other small dams here. There's one, here's a larger one that they built. And one thing that I find really interesting about beavers, and I just learned this recently, is that we all, I think, are familiar with the dams. We've seen them, we kind of marvel at them or we're frustrated by them, but depending on where they are and what our sort of outlook is. But I have just recently learned more about, you know, why beavers build dams and what are the associated construction methods that they use. So obviously they're building dams to impound water. And they're doing that in part because the food that they prefer to eat, so willows mostly, just fast growing shrubs that actually respond really well when, you know, they have multiple stems. When a beaver comes in and chews down 3 or 4 of the 8 stems on a plant, that plant will just respond by growing 5 more. So, you know, they're coppicing, the term for when a plant has multiple stems. Willows are naturally coppicing plants, and then beavers have co-evolved with them. And so they're coppicing again once beavers are doing that. Often I've seen, the other thing about willow is that you can cut a stem of willow and just stick it in wet ground and it'll just grow. It'll root and produce leaves and turn into another plant. The cool thing that I've seen about beaver dams is sometimes when beavers are using fresh willow to build their dam, it will have contact with the mud and the sediments on the bottom of the wetland, and it will take root and then grow a new plant. And so you're having this like very cool, they're like literally planting their own food, or they're creating the conditions for their food to grow. And they're building dams not just out of like dead sticks that are sort of just like a construction material, but actually a living material that then grows into a plant that has roots and that is more stable, and it's going to just have all the ecological impacts of something that's alive versus just like a dead construction material. I find that really interesting as well. But I was talking about the impact, the other things that beavers do. They not only build dams, but they're very awkward in terms of how they move on land. If you've ever seen one try to walk on land, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a beaver walking on land because they just aren't very good at it. They don't like to do it. It takes a lot of energy for them. They actually prefer to swim and move around in the water. So they also excavate these canals. And so like right here, on this image behind this dam, here's the dam, but then here's this little channel that goes to the edge of the wetland. That's a canal. And so for every dam that they build, they will probably build multiple times that length of canal behind the dam. And that helps them get to the edges of the wetland to access wood, more trees that they to cut down. And also just to move around more easily and to have some shelter from predators and so forth. So and again, as we start to like look through this image a little bit more, some of these things start to pop. This, like here's a little beaver dam here, and you can trace like this is where the original like larger stream kind of flows through, kind of winds around here and comes over here and then goes down over here. There's the canal there. There's also like a little bit of a canal over here that they've built to like connect these places. There's some channels out here that have been excavated. So it's just cool how they kind of like, and all of those canals can also be used by other organisms. So it's very interesting how they're just building these very, very complex, very ecologically rich wetlands. I should say too, in terms of when they're creating spaces for plants like willows to just continue to grow and then get kind of harvested for their own food or their own building materials. That's obviously plant material taking up carbon, storing carbon as well. So yeah, one other thing I wanted to zoom out here to show you on this site is the way that people have been trying to coexist with beavers. Here's some really good canals here. So downstream, there's some ones that are just going off to the sides of the complex. Yeah, somebody mentioned that beavers can be pretty challenging when they're not in a place that has enough space for them. And when we think about our state and when it was settled by people who arrived when beavers weren't even here at all, we, those first white settlers really settled in places that if beavers had been here, maybe we wouldn't have settled. People wouldn't have settled in those spots. Lowland areas, river valleys, very fertile areas, fertile because of the legacy of the beavers who had been kind of maintaining wetlands there. So it's not a surprise that a lot of times the places that are human settlements also conflict with beavers because we're kind of looking for the same thing, like lowland areas, access to water, fertile soils, that kind of thing. And we can talk more about that. But what I wanted to show is, so here's the main dam and the main pond. And then as the water kind of flows over here, it takes a couple of paths down and then it goes underneath the railroad. And that's like quite a big culvert. Like I think it's a really old kind of concrete culvert that's there. The beaver activity had been, I think, undermining some of that railroad grade. So a few years ago, the Charlotte Park and Wildlife Refuge Committee worked to install something called a beaver deceiver. Has anyone heard of this beaver deceiver or a beaver flow device? It's something that's flow device. Yeah. So it's essentially like a fenced structure around a culvert that prevents beavers from damming that culvert and undermining it, essentially causing erosion around it. So they're all unique. Every single site is different. So when a beaver deceiver is installed or a beaver flow device is installed, the person doing it has to really look at the site and figure out exactly how to do it well. So in this case, it's a two-stage structure. And this was done before I visited the site, but I did get to look at it once it was installed. So you can see just really kind of a sketchy outline here of like a wooden kind of cage kind of thing here that's right next to the culvert. And so it's covering up the culvert so beavers can't get in there and dam it. And then upstream there is, and then here is like a plastic culvert pipe that is part of the beaver flow device. And then this is another structure that's just upstream that's protecting the inlet of that culvert so beavers can't go and then dam that. So the idea here is that water can continue to flow through the culvert or through the system. Beavers can continue to do their thing. They're upstream and they can have that work in that whole wetland. They're not going to dam the culvert and they can stay and the culvert won't get damaged and they don't need to be killed or trapped. So this is an adaptation strategy that people are using in a lot of different places. I think we have a lack of people in Vermont who are able to install these. There's always sort of a backlog in the situations I've heard of. There's just never enough people who can put those in. But hopefully that'll change in the future. And I'm going to go back to my presentation here. I guess I'll stop and see if anyone has questions just about this site or about anything that we just talked about.
Is it possible for you to zoom in a little bit closer on the beaver deceiver?
I can. I think this might be as clear as it gets, but I do have a picture of one that we installed last fall that I think will be better. But yeah, can you see? Is that better?
It is better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's not great. This is the limitation of the imagery. It's really good imagery, but when it gets down to like a 2x4, it's kind of falls apart. But yeah, you can see that they always have this general structure, like a thing right by the big culvert that you're trying to protect, the one that goes under the road or the railroad or whatever, a plastic pipe that goes out behind it, and then another fenced in thing that's around that. And so these wooden fence pieces are like wrapped in some kind of wire so that beavers can't get in. And it's like you have to figure out the right type of wire that isn't going to allow beavers to get in, but it's not too fine that it's going to catch every single little leaf and piece of grass that comes floating downstream, because that would clog it as well. So there's a whole like design theory around this. And again, it's a really interesting technical line of work that I think we need more people doing in the state, because these kind of beaver human conflicts are in every town. I think and individual people have them as well. And there are some resources out there for people to get trained in some like established techniques for building these. But they do need to be built right. They need to be pretty carefully designed and use, robust materials. If you use like chicken wire, imagine that like, one big storm in the fall that's bringing a bunch of leaves is just going to, just hammer that out of shape. Any other questions before I jump back to the last couple slides?
I don't see any.
Okay, great. Well, looks like I went back to the beginning here. Yeah, I wanted to share just, again, this is just like the title slide of another presentation, but I will get you this link when I share my slides here. Just that we've been talking about flood resilience, just the physical movement of water, slowing it down, keeping it higher on the landscape. Beaver wetlands are an amazing way to do this. But they also have been shown in a pretty interesting ways in many different locations to impact water quality as well. So we've been talking about water, quantity and flow and response to floods, but beaver dams have also been shown to really like limit water temperature, keep water colder, which is great in terms of fish habitat. They retain sediment, they retain phosphorus. And this, I really encourage you, if you're interested in this, to follow this link when you get these slides from me. Katie Holzer is an engineer and a watershed scientist in Gresham, Oregon, which is a part of Portland. I think it's like a sort of a suburb of Portland, Oregon, and just has some really, really interesting findings. They had built like an engineered stormwater system there that beavers just found, and beavers moved in, and people initially were like, this is not going to work. This is in the middle of an industrial area in a city. Beavers can't really be here. And by the team there just decided to study it and see what happened, and found that they had initially engineered like a sort of a way for water to move through the stormwater system in a very like convoluted path, hoping that it would be dropping pollutants, toxins, sediment, and so forth as it flowed through. Beavers came in and just like interrupted that by building a couple of dams that slowed the water, but it also it gave it a more direct path, but it had to flow through the dams. The beavers were initially trapped and removed from the site, but then they came back. Other beavers came back, and the team studied this and found that, yeah, the water was colder. The water didn't have as much phosphorus. The sediment had dropped out. Other pollutants had dropped out, and so essentially the beavers coming into this already engineered system were making it even better, cleaning the water even more. So there's a lot of evidence for that, and there's people working on this in different parts of the country. So I definitely encourage you to check out this this slideshow. Ask me some questions if you are interested in it, and just use that as a jumping off point to learn more. So these are a couple photos of the beaver deceiver that we installed in Cambridge. This is the same site of that beautiful photo that I started with. The pond is a little further downstream for those 2 beaver dams that we started looking at. So this is Skip Lyle, who has developed a design for the beaver deceiver. He lives in Vermont. He's considered like a mentor to a lot of people who do this work in other places too. But so this it's actually a man-made dam that you can see in the lower right. It has a couple big culverts, and beavers have been continually going there and damming them, and that's causing some issues for like a farm operation that's nearby. So we decided to put in the beaver deceiver, partly because it's also a really great place for people to come and like look and see it. And it's right by a road and a great place to have events and education. So yeah, it's a similar idea. So this is a plastic culvert, 2 of them actually kind of attached together. There's a wire cage with wood that's going out into the pond, and it actually sits on the bottom of the pond. And this photo on the left is actually Skip, like in the process. He flipped the whole thing over. So it's got wood now. It's sitting with what you're seeing on the top is now sitting on the bottom of the pond, wood on the top of that. It's weighted down with a bunch of like concrete blocks. And then that is allowing water to just flow in without alerting beavers to the fact that water's flowing. And then the culvert goes in this lower part of this picture, the lower picture, the culvert's going into the big culvert, water's moving through, but the whole thing is fenced out, so beavers can't get in there and dam that. I should mention there's really interesting research that shows that beavers are attracted to a very specific, very small window of like flow rate of water. So this kind of probably makes sense to all of you intuitively. Beavers are not going to go and dam, the Connecticut River. They're also not going to dam like the tiniest little trickle of water that's like flowing out of someone's garden. There's a certain flow rate that they respond to. This culvert happened to be in that rate because beavers were always going there. So this is why it became an issue. And we decided to do this, to install this. And this is one of a couple different types of coexistence strategies for humans and beavers to coexist with each other so that they don't have to be killed. Because when they're killed, they're obviously not going to be doing all the amazing things that they do. I should say, I should stop here and just say, just because this image is interesting, it shows a man-made dam and beaver activity. And to me, this is a work in progress, because part of the work that I'm doing at Vermont Land Trust is I'm also really interested in removing man-made dams. But I'm very interested in encouraging beavers to build their dams. And so I think sometimes people will hear that and be like, well, why remove one type of dam and build another type? I think that the research that I just showed, that those kind of tidbits of research that I just shared show that beaver dams are really structurally very different than a man-made dam. Think about it. It's like something that's made of a bunch of sticks. It's porous, versus a man-made dam made out of concrete or rocks or something like that that's very solid and that's just holding water and keeping it pretty stagnant behind the man-made dam. With a beaver dam, you're having water is still able to go through, but it's filtered. Colder water is able to stay at the bottom of that flow column, versus just like sitting on the bottom of a pond behind a man-made dam, which then warms up, and then the water flowing over the top of a man-made dam actually ends up being warmer than the water flowing through a beaver dam. So yeah, and they also, of course, beaver dams are associated with just all of the really interesting and complicated and ecologically diverse wetlands that form upstream from them. So just wanted to mention that because I think it's an interesting duality. Just to end, and I'm not sure if this is part of what you were interested in learning about today, but just wanted to share it since it's part of my work at Vermont Land Trust. We are involved in different lands, lands that we've conserved or lands that we own and have conserved, in doing stream restoration that's actually meant to mimic beavers. So in this case, these are some students from the University of Vermont building what's called a beaver dam analog in a very small headwater stream in Colchester. They're using buckthorn posts, so invasive buckthorn that had been cut the year before, hammered into the ground, and then weaving willows between them to make a small beaver dam looking thing. And this has actually been really effective in terms of slowing down water when we've had big rainstorms and letting it go out onto the small floodplain that's next to that stream. So that is just another piece. And I think I maybe... Yeah, that's all I had for prepared slides. But getting back to this picture again, just hopefully you all can have a little bit more of an understanding and appreciation of the amazing ways that beavers impact our landscape and can help us move towards solutions for things like water quality and flood response. But happy to talk about anything that you're interested in, questions. Yeah, I'm interested to hear your own experiences or share more about what we're doing if that's of interest.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation and for and helping us out on short notice. It's really
Sure.
Great. I am wondering about other climate benefits of beavers, if you know about the carbon sequestration and their role in that.
Yeah, that is very, all I can say with certainty is that it's complicated. So wetlands in general they can sequester a lot of carbon, but they also can release carbon. So it depends on the wetland in terms of what the net is, whether it's really a sink or a source of carbon. With beavers, I mean, I really think about the way that they are continuing to harvest wood material and they're creating space for woody wetlands to form. So I think obviously it's interesting when you think about what they're doing. This image on the right, this is a different site than that one that we were looking at in Charlotte, but look how the beaver dam is, it's open water and then it's kind of some herbaceous stuff right behind it. But then this whole area between that one and the next one is all shrubs. So that's all wood. And as we know, wood is a great place where carbon is stored and sequestered. It's actively growing, sequestering more carbon as it grows, and it's actively being eaten by the beavers. And so they're cutting it down, it's growing again. And so it's just like taking up more and more and more. It's a lot more woody plants in general. My understanding is that they are better at sequestering carbon than herbaceous plants. Do not quote me on that necessarily. But obviously they're bigger, they're more robust, there's more structure there, more carbon to take up. Those are the kinds of systems that beavers create because like I was saying, that's what they like to eat. That's what provides shelter, provides their building material for their lodges and so forth. But yeah, in terms of like an individual wetland, like getting more detailed about the carbon benefits, it's hard for me to say anything really with certainty there. And that's partly just because I'm not doing that research, but I would say even the people that are doing the research would probably say something similar.
Thanks. And then also their just overall role in biodiversity. You've touched on it some,
Yeah.
But they're really creating a lot of habitat for a lot of different plants and animals out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Incredible contributors to they're creating ecosystems. And so they're creating complicated ecosystems. And so all of those places are places where you're going to have a diverse suite of animals, plants, fungi developing. And there's some cool studies. Like there was one that I had seen a while ago, and I can't put my finger on like who it was, but I can try to dig it up. Just talking about some of the ways that the cycles of beaver dams being created and falling apart, if beavers are moving on. is actually very similar in terms of a time frame to the cycles of some amphibians that need vernal pool type habitat. And so there's, you think about like a spotted salamander or a wood frog. Those are species of amphibians that really depend on vernal pools, isolated pools that are not, different from a beaver system. But those two species are also present in beaver complexes. And there's sort of like a cycle at which those pools, like in a beaver system, may be present or when the dam gets breached, they drain and then there's not a pool for a while. It's actually really similar to how vernal pools can behave up in the woods, where some years they're full of water and the amphibians can breed and mature, some years they don't, and they're dynamic and they're they're just unpredictable. But there's some kind of tie-in with like the lifespan of a vernal pool versus the lifespan of a beaver wetland, and some things about the life cycles of those amphibians as well. That's one thing. I mean, migratory bird habitat, they're creating these incredible shrublands full of alders and willows that provide just amazing native places for migratory birds to nest. There's a lot of birds, especially some of the warblers, that are threatened, declining in population, that really depend on shrubs with trees nearby. So like the golden winged warbler and the blue winged warbler are two that I've worked on with the Audubon Society. Places like this where you have shrubland, you have water nearby, and you have trees nearby, provide kind of this like perfect system for like the nest. The shrubs provide the places for the nests to be. The trees provide places for perching and finding food. These are insect-eating birds. The water obviously provides needed water. And so they just really support a whole suite of migratory birds. And, you can think about other mammals too that are really dependent on these systems in terms of the water availability that they create. A lot of times when I am seeing like seepage wetlands, so a lot of beaver wetlands are high in the headwaters. They're fed, the initial source of water, aside from just like surface water that's coming from rain or snowmelt, is seeps and groundwater. Those are places where the water emerges to the surface, and it's a pretty similar temperature all year round. It doesn't freeze because it's so deep in the ground. Those are places that green up really early in the spring. And so you see animals coming out of hibernation, like bears and so forth. They are preferentially coming to those places. They're coming to the edge of beaver wetlands to feed. And so it's like the first feeding that's so important for them. Come to a place like this before food is available elsewhere. I could go, I mean, there's so much more, but those are just a few examples that pop in to my head.
Yeah, that's great. Do other members have questions? No. So I have spent some time with lots of beaver fans this summer, and one person is Beverly Soychek. She's from Moncton, and she's really demonstrated how towns can save money with beaver deceivers. And they've year over year, they're saving thousands of dollars managing beavers differently there where they can. So we may have time at some point to hear about some of that. And then there's a professor at Middlebury College who, Alexis Michaela, who's doing paleoecology work, looking at some of what Alara shared with us, like what did the landscape look like before European settlers came in? And she's going back and using actually historic preservation test pits to recreate places where the beavers were. So hopefully at some point we'll get a chance to hear from her. She's doing really interesting research on that. Thank you so much again for coming in and sharing your passion for and interest in and knowledge on beavers with us today.
You're welcome. Yeah, and please reach out if anyone has any questions. Alara@vlt.org. Happy to follow up.
Great.
And I'll get those links to you too, so you can have the slides and the links in them.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Members have any comments or questions or anything? So tomorrow we're going to start hearing back from some of the many opt session work that will inform our work for the session, the studies. And then Thursday we'll be looking at the Renewable Energy Standard Working Group and what they've done.